So, Amy, we appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with us as a KSI coach and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you so much, Ian, for having me.
Excellent. So, Amy, at the moment, what level are you in the KSI coaching program?
I'm midway in level 1.
Level 1, excellent, excellent. So, how did you get to hear about KSI in the first place, Amy?
Well, just to start way back a little bit, I grew up playing several sports, mainly soccer, growing up playing competitively throughout college. And I've always enjoyed having an active lifestyle, playing sports, going on hikes and going to the gym. So, of course, along the way, unfortunately, I've sustained some injuries along the way. And so had to go through some rehab myself. And that was actually when I had an incredible experience with a physical therapist that kind of just stuck with me through college. And so it kind of inspired me to ultimately pursue a career in physical therapy.
What to talk about there, I want to come back talk about injuries, and I also want to talk about physical therapy. So you're drawn to physical therapy from a positive experience in physical therapy.
Yes. And so kind of quickly fast forward, being in my program, I quickly learned that formal education is a great springboard for learning, but I think ultimately it's outside of the formal education environment that I think I will really learn and discover the deeper concepts and the whys for certain rehab and strengthening training methods. So after my first year in my program, I happened to be in the right place in the right time and be introduced to Coach Driessen, who strongly encouraged me to start taking the online KSI courses. So here I am.
So how many years into your formal degree are you now?
I'm 3 years in. I'm gonna finish my last semester actually next week. So
wow, so nearly done.
Yep, then I'm done, and then I have 2 more clinical rotations to do over the summer, and then I plan to take the boards in October. So
at the moment in your discipline, is getting a job, so to speak, pretty much a guarantee? So the majority of graduates from your course going to get employed?
The job market for physical therapy across the span of the U.S. is it looks very good, especially considering the I guess stronger focus on health and wellness in our communities, and trying to just maintain a longer, healthier life and doing active things or just going about your day-to-day life. So
if you compare that to say someone coming through sports science, it seems to be or even personal training for that matter, it seems to be more of a guaranteed career path than someone coming in, wanting to get a job as a so-called strength and conditioning coach.
I think it's just a matter of your personal drive and motivation to give back to the community and having the necessary resources and tools to kind of motivate other people to want to buy into your product or what you want to give to other people.
So if you're a driven person, what gave you drive? What was it in your life that set you up to be a driven person?
Just going through various injuries and health setbacks. I think just my newfound perspective, just the value of health and being injury free is just so important for me. And just knowing from an athlete standpoint, just the value of being able to play your sport at a competitive level and not get injured or have setbacks that either delay your ultimate goal or even just completely take that away, the future of your athletic career. So I definitely bring that kind of perspective of just knowing that type of mindset and wanting to avoid those types of injuries for future clients.
So what are some of the historic influences in your physical therapy training that you're seeing coming through? Some of the stronger influences, because what I do is spend the time understanding influences in physical therapy.
I'm sorry, you're asking just
Have you, for
particular.
example, are there any historical influences? Like, what are the main influences on what they teach you? Is it all just based on modern teachings, or is some more historical influences? Do you think?
Well, also kind of just going through some of your material too, and then also just going through the formal education route. We do learn the foundational and the standard practices as a physical therapist, which is all very important and very critical for becoming a licensed physical therapist. But at the same time, we don't delve into the deep rooted concepts and where these named concepts or theories come from. And so
Okay.
I think that's why KSI has been so eye-opening for me, just because I do learn some aspects of what you have in the material, but I had no idea just the origins or any of that. And it just definitely gives me a greater appreciation.
So what we have in common is that, and I'm certainly not wearing it on my sleeve as a badge of honor, but in the early 80s, as a very young athlete, I too had some injuries. One of them was a congenital back condition, which really slowed me down and I really struggled with. And another one was I was basically the stopper of a 1-ton vehicle, so I was hit by a car.
Oh,
So ultimately, I had lower back issue and knee issue, around about the age of 20 or thereabouts. And I spent, in those days, the students at the university, the clinic for physical therapy was actually on campus, and it was the students, the postgraduate students, and the lecturers and the professors that all worked together to give experiences to the impending graduates on how to obviously treat clients and injuries. So I spent an incredible amount of time in that environment where I got to know them so well. As I said, not necessarily a good thing, because obviously injuries aren't necessarily a good thing, but I got a massive exposure to physical therapy in my first year or two of undergraduate studies. I almost spent more time with physical therapists, well, I probably did at that stage, than I did with my own colleagues.
mhm.
So I got a really good insight, as you did, into the impact of physical therapy, but also because the University of Queensland at that time had many leading researchers. It had a massive impact on me, the thinking that was going on in that department. And I think, in a large part, over and above the desire to help the athletes stay injury free, I think that really shaped a lot of my thinking in terms of the influences I got from the physical therapy. So that's why I've got an incredible interest in physical therapy. And we also had Mike Pimentel, the late Mike Pimentel was also a athletic trainer in our program, and it was really good to work with him. He had as much experience in that discipline as well as in physical preparation. But marrying the two, he was a really great asset. So if you're willing to link physical training with physical therapy, I think you can be an incredible asset to an athlete, because my overall attitude is that the injuries occur in training, and therefore the decisions made in training are where they're prevented. It's they don't get prevented from being pushed and prodded and having a TENS machine stuck on them. That's not really where injury prevention occurs. It occurs in the training process and the decisions in the training process. So I think we can do a lot more good when we marry those two disciplines, and you're obviously well on your way to that. So were you surprised at some of the things that you learned in the KSI coaching program from a physical therapist perspective?
I wouldn't say I was necessarily surprised in the sense of the content. It was very straightforward and broke things down without making it very complex. And it was just, I think, the emphasis on just the basics of, movement and how muscles, joints, the nervous system, everything comes together and works together. I think it was surprising in the sense that there's not more like material in the standard like educational environment that is like that, because I think everybody should be hearing that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. Historically, if you read my original Winning and Losing that I wrote in 1997, I was saying to the physical training or physical preparation world, listen, you should be more conscious of injury prevention and getting more involved in it, because there was zero overlap between the two in that time. And ironically now, it's like 23 years later, that has definitely occurred. There's a lot of people who are talking the talk, and there's a lot of attempts to integrate the two. Obviously, the direction that's taken. Let's just say if the direction that the industry's gone in was successful, we wouldn't be in the greatest injury boom in the world, in the history of the world. And we are in an injury boom. I mean, there's very clear statistics. We're in an injury boom, and I know you're smiling because it'll keep you employed for the rest of your life. But so what I'm saying is, we've gone from doing nothing in physical preparation towards injury prevention and injury rehab to being, everyone's all over it. They've got all the words, but it's actually not working. That's my perspective. What's yours on that?
In terms of just the...
Do you think we're effectively preventing injuries across the board with athletes?
Clearly not, because you see it all over the place with just professional athletes getting their ACL torn again, or a meniscus tear, or just, reoccurring injuries. And clearly that's not because they have a well-designed program to help prevent those preventable injuries. And, my perspective, especially just going through some of your work and your material, is just the importance of, as a physical therapist mindset, not just treating the injury. You have to look at the person as an individual, not just the physical aspects, but the emotional aspects, their lifestyle, and how important that all ties together with, caring for them in the long term, not just to get them ready enough to play another soccer game, but to actually go through their life in a healthy way and hopefully injury-free way.
Holism. So was that holism reflected in your course, or you're picking that holism up from your own life, or you're picking it up from the KSI?
Through KSI, through what Justin has also reiterated many times, just a holistic view of an individual, which you can uncover so much more than beyond the eye can see. So
let's talk about one of the influences in the American culture in physical training. Strength is a very dominant focus, and I think anybody who suggests that's not the case doesn't really hasn't traveled the world to understand. Relatively speaking, it's a very strength focused environment. I understand the role of American football in an American society, and the role of American football in American college, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where strength and conditioning, the term, came from. Essentially, it came from American football strength coaching or strength training. And the word conditioning was an add-on, it was an afterthought. So in rehab, do you feel that your formal rehabilitation training has also got a dominant focus on strength as a rehabilitative mode or a cause or causation for injury?
Yeah, I mean, we've learned various causes for musculoskeletal injuries relating to strength deficits, weaknesses, fatigue. And that was kind of tying in with the strength and conditioning that through NSCA that I also, we're all required to get our certification through that as well.
Right. So let me give you an example. Hamstrings. I mean, in the early 80s, hamstrings were they injured because they were weak, and we're 40 years later, and hamstrings are injured because they're weak, and now it's maybe the eccentric phase is weaker and not the contrary, but nothing's really changed, and that I started out testing all the theories that were dominant in our industry, and basically if they didn't work, I threw them out, and that's one for me that I think is an example of an overemphasis on the role of strength. I mean, you might have heard me say this, but I've taught this repetitively. Muscles aren't weak; they're inhibited. So if something's tearing, it's not because it's necessarily because it's weak. It's because it's inhibited, and the weakness is a byproduct. So making a muscle stronger is not necessarily the solution to the cause in the first place.
Agreed.
Is that consistent with what you think the physical therapy is teaching in America, or is it slightly different?
I think that's the overwhelming concept that they do teach is the importance of strength. Whereas just through hearing through you and Justin and his colleagues, the importance of flexibility and all of that, and how flexibility is such a very lightly talked about topic that is just very brushed over in everything that I've learned and just through KSI, it's opened my eyes just how critical that is above strength.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great example of more of the Eastern European influence about the old world balance in terms of physical preparation, all the qualities of physical preparation, whereas the American focus on strength. So if you took the NSCA textbook, Essentials of Strength and Conditioning, and you broke it into a word count or a subject count, and I did this back in the 90s, and asked the question, what percentage of the content is dedicated towards strength, what percentage of the content is dedicated towards, say, flexibility, speed, or endurance. It'll be pretty skewed in one direction. And the tragedy for me from a flexibility perspective is we've gone from an innocent age in terms of we didn't give flexibility a lot of attention, but we didn't discourage it either. Somewhere in the 90s, like a switch was flicked, led out of America, where they said stretching is actually bad, and people are actually discouraged to stretch. Are you taught that in college, that stretching is bad and you shouldn't do static stretching before you train and things like that?
I have learned growing up, but also I don't know necessarily through the professors, but I know among my colleagues in the program have said, oh, static stretching is bad, you lose power and you can't perform as well if you do it before a workout or some sort of competition.
Yes.
So I just thought it was interesting.
You've seen that. So it'd be like saying to an athlete, okay, you're a motocross athlete, and today you should motocross before you do dry land or physical preparation, but don't motocross because it'll make you weak for the dry land, because strength is all that matters. Well, actually, no. Your ability to perform the sport is probably a little bit more important than how much weight you displace in the gym in a non-specific exercise. So, I see that
occurs.
It's coming through. That influence is coming through, and I think it's sad to see professionals who are taught to think objectively and scientifically being influenced by what I see as a dominant trend of the time. There's no justification to saying that in 10 years' time, you'll be better off if you don't static stretch before you train. In fact, I think in 10 years' time, you'll be so worse off that you're going to be an injury case. But who am I to talk after only 40 years of practice? So what sort of clients are you looking forward to working with? Where are you going with you're going to get to choose, or ultimately who do you want to work with?
I would love to work with active individuals. Athletes would be incredible. Basically anyone who is motivated and want to be there to work with me, because it's a two-way street, and I see way too often in your general outpatient orthopedic clinics where people are dragging their feet to come in to do their very low impact basic exercises that aren't necessarily fast tracking them or even improving them or getting them back to where they want to be. So it's I would love to work with motivated individuals. So usually that's more of the active population. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a phenomenal need to it. And I believe that to attract a certain client base, you have to be the person that client base wants you to be. So if people wanted to work with athletes, if they lack a discipline, if they lack drive, they typically don't attract athletes. And it's your level of intensity and your thinking that determines the level of athlete you're going to attract. So if you want to attract the top end athlete that really can, and I'm not talking about top end, I'm talking about it from, you're a better human being if you work with LeBron James. I mean, LeBron James is a human like everyone else, and the fact he can stuff a piece of leather or whatever in a hoop doesn't make him a better human being, but there's more at stake. And when you're dealing with athletes, there's more at stake. They have a different thought process, and it's pretty fun to work with athletes or even humans, any high performers who have that different mindset, because they ultimately find out what they're looking for by trial and error. Sometimes it doesn't always end out well, but it's great to have an athlete who's got the goods and realize something's missing, and they go looking for that missing something. So that's a really good client group for me, and anybody who likes to work with athletes or individuals who are really focused on achieving their goals.
Yeah.
So some of the injuries that you've got in retrospect, when you were young, have you realized anything about the injuries that you've got as a result of your subsequent either reflections or what you've learned?
Well, my recurring ankle sprains playing soccer is the very reason why I also want to reiterate how important it is to give my rehab services beyond just fixing the immediate issue, but maybe turning my focus or attention to some other limitation or deficit in the rest of the body that is causing me to be moving differently because of the previous injury. And so I think being able to, I guess, focus on that aspect of when I'm giving therapy is just really important, beyond just treating an injury. It's just not. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
So absolutely incredible, because if we don't truly not only rehabilitate the injury, and very few athletes actually, or individuals fully rehabilitate, and that's the cause of the next injury. But beyond that, if we don't identify the cause and remove the cause, then it's never going to go away. It's an oxymoron to expect to rehabilitate an athlete in the same mindset or the same environment that the injury was caused in. So if it's not chased back to the roots and truly removed, then you end up with a litany and just one injury after. And the irony about those sorts of injuries is that they don't always appear to be related. They can be on the opposite side of the body, they can be the opposite end of the body, and people see them as a separate incident. We've really, if you looked at it from, I guess, a psychological point of view, you have to say skeletons in the cupboard. We leave a lot of skeletons in the cupboard with athletes' bodies. And it's just tragic. But at the end of the day, I guess if an athlete's an adult, they've got to take responsibility for finding the answer. There's a big difference between someone in a college environment where they're under a lot of pressure to conform, and I see that, compared to, say, a professional athlete who, and again, depending upon their sport, but at least in America, the professional athletes are given a lot more autonomy to make decisions about their preparation and their rehab. In a more socialistic countries, and obviously I'm talking relatively speaking, say an Australian professional athlete, there's so much conformity from them to pressure for them to stay within the services of the team. But at least a pro athlete in America can, spend quite a few months of the year outside of that team. So it's the onus is to some extent on the adult athlete to solve their problems. It's tough to watch them if they're not willing to overcome conformity. But I mean, conformity affects all of us, doesn't it? It's just a big price to pay. And you'd experience that in your occupation. I think if you felt that conformity to think a certain way or to treat the client in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a main reason, or a huge reason, that I want to continue this learning opportunity and journey with KSI, just because it's the audience, the group is, everybody's coming from a different like thought process or corner of the world, just with different experiences that I don't necessarily get in the classroom, where it's just PT students. And just, I don't want to conform or be in this echo chamber in the classroom where, okay, this is what a PT should be doing, therefore, like, there's really no other way or to go about treating or helping out a client.
Absolutely. And what you'll enjoy about our program is we start from the physical preparation perspective with a little bit of physical therapy content, but the further you go in the levels, the more they become one, so that they actually merge to the point. There is no separation. And I know that's can be a delicate topic from a professional delineation perspective, but that's the reality. We don't separate the two. Mm-hmm. I talk about performance enhancement and injury prevention as separate things early, but I don't separate them down the track, because if you've got any inhibition from an injury, you have performance decrement even before you know it. So there is no separation. If you get an athlete, the more the athlete plays a sport, the more their body becomes negatively impacted. And so we spend the majority of our time reversing the damage from the sport, and that's performance enhancement, even though it doesn't appear to be. Mm-hmm. And that's a point that is missed, but certainly you'll appreciate as you come through into, it depends on how far you go, but we've had the benefit of, as I said, Mike Pimentel's teaching. We've got quite a few videos of Mike teaching. Okay, so this is the ankle joint, and this is how the physical therapist looks at the ankle joint, and this is some things we can do to understand what's going on. And we got him to do that with a number of joints, and so many case studies with athletes as well. The rehabilitation case studies that are captured on our video library at the higher level are really exciting. And you know, many cases where athletes, you know, they were Olympians, they can't go back to the Olympics, or, you know, their career's in jeopardy. And if we can overcome that injury, then they can come back and fulfill their potential, fulfill their and experience self-fulfillment for themselves, because, you know, that's been a life goal for them for many years. You know, they have an unfinished business in their sport.
Yeah,
That's why
absolutely.
pretty
I
exciting
agree
stuff.
with you. Yeah, it's awesome.
Excellent. So talk about some of the injuries that you had as a younger person.
My first serious injury was a very bad ankle sprain, deltoid ligament. So the inside of my ankle, where I was playing, I was in 6th grade at the time, so very small. And my team, we were playing indoor soccer, and the other team had forfeited, so our team just wanted to play since we were already there. So our coach played keeper, and he came out and slide tackled me, not realizing how small I am and the very detrimental effects of that. So it was a very stressful time. I was on crutches for about 4 weeks. And so that was kind of a slightly scarring event for me as a 6th grader.
Well, I can understand that.
I don't know how old I was, but pretty young. And so
let's stay on the ankles for a moment, because I want to talk
yeah.
about ankles. And I can relate to that, because I think the first time I had a substantial ankle injury was at the age of 12. So it's not uncommon. So tell me, how many times after did that injury reoccur around the ankle? How many times did you re-injure the ankle?
So many, countless times, and inside and outside, but mostly my lateral ankle after that. But after my first injury, I never really rehabbed fully, and that's the very reason why I want to combine rehab and physical preparation, performance, and understanding.
So did you, in hindsight, are you happy with the guidance? I mean, what was missing? Was the guidance missing, or was your cognitive ability, your emotional maturity to understand what was to do was missing? You know, was it, you know, you were too driven to play and therefore didn't listen to what you were told? I mean, what was missing from that failure to rehabilitate?
I think it was both. I mean, I was very young. I wanted to play. I took the time, though, the necessary allotted time, that at least recommended by the physical therapist, to heal and rehab. But I don't think that I got the necessary, like the full, complete rehab that I really needed, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, and how to really overcome this to prevent this from happening again. And I don't think I got any of that.
I call it the psychology of the injured athlete. So if you don't understand the psychology of the injured athlete, and you don't know how to deliver the information that they need to hear, because an injured athlete needs to hear certain things to shape their decision-making process moving forwards. And so it's a really important area. And I know, again, I'm stepping over the delineation of professional career paths, etc. But somebody's got to talk to the athlete about, okay, this is what's going to happen, and this is what we've got to do. And like, there is so much time in counselling an athlete over the injury psychology that obviously I don't think it's taught. I don't think any discipline gets enough, or adequate teaching on this, because if I felt that the athlete didn't embrace the thinking process needed to move forward successfully, then we just have to put a moratorium in place until we get this. You need to understand this. And every time there's an error in decision making moving forwards, you need to reset and say, listen, you obviously didn't get it. Yeah. You know, these are the rules of the game now. These are the rules of engagement. And if you don't embrace the rules of engagement, this is what's going to happen. And you know, how many times can you re-injure an ankle in particular? We'll talk about ankles a bit more, before you're basically, it's a tough road. I mean, you don't have too many opportunities with an ankle. Yeah, which is tough. And like, ankles are such a limiting factor in so many sports, you know, all hardcore multi-directional sports, you know, basketball, tennis, you know, in Australia, netball, you know, it's, you know, squash. We could go on for so many sports, and they're not the only sports, but geez, how many careers have been ended
Yeah.
from an ankle. So let me talk to you about what are your thoughts on taping and bracing. I know we're getting a little bit specific in the physical therapy genre, and I don't want. I'm going to put this disclaimer first. I don't teach high level. I don't teach injury rehabilitation to low level physical preparation coaches. If you can't show me that you can prevent an athlete's injuries, then don't ask me to teach you how to rehabilitate them. Because there's nothing worse than someone who thinks that they can rehabilitate an injury when they're causing the injury in the first place. And the majority of injuries that we're seeing now didn't exist 40 years ago or 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And they're existing because the overlay of physical preparation in sport. So the majority of injuries that we're seeing are caused by external influences that didn't need to occur. They got nothing to do with the sport. And these are the same people that want to become injury rehabilitation specialists. Like, give me a break. Anyway, I just want to put that disclaimer in there first. But talk to me about braces and taping. What are your thoughts?
Well, I personally, without really having autonomy myself to really understand the concept and the benefits and potential disadvantages of bracing and taping in the athlete mindset. So I wore ankle braces since I had the recurring ankle injuries. But going through education and really reading more about the importance of it, it obviously changes your gait pattern. It changes your movement and mechanics ultimately, and that could then further along cause more injuries that were not there before. And so they say, or they encourage, they meaning professors or researchers out there or colleagues, saying it's fine to use the braces or the taping for practice purposes, but for the actual game environment, it's not. It's preferred not to wear it, just because it, again, like I said, it changes the entire mechanics of your movement.
So I'm going to share you my thoughts. My thoughts is that the holy grail of ankles is to wean you off all support mechanisms completely and never need them. And I know that's really different to the dominance. In fact, some sports introduce them as a compulsory action, and they claim it from a lot of different reasons. But that's my goal. The healthy athlete, from an ankle perspective, an athlete that does not wear anything. And obviously that's not. I wouldn't want anyone to go cold turkey. That's a whole new ball game. If there's a degree of reliance, they may never become free of them. But that's the goal. And the fact that we put them on is a sign of an error. There's been an error made, because humans can heal from anything. So if you have one incident that's allegedly be outside of your control, like yours, you can still heal from that and come back and be brace free and tape free. So just wanted to challenge some thinkings around that as an example, as a case study. And I do want to come back to some of the other injuries you've experienced, but I've got Carson. Carson's on the line. So Carson is in Austria. Carson is a Canuck. So he's going to have a mixed accent there, but I'm sure you can relate to that. So Carson, go ahead with the question.
Thanks, Ian. And thanks, Amy. It's really interesting to listen to you two talk. My question is about when you're dealing with a sport. Actually, to be specific, one sport that I deal with is judo. And I have an athlete who has recurring back problem. And I think a lot of the problems are just from the habit she has in her sport. And I find it, if I'm working with an athlete and trying to teach him how to run, or how to cut, or how to stop, I can teach judo that I don't really understand that well, where I think they're probably doing things that are continually causing problems. It's really tough to figure out how to change their behavior, or if that behavior can actually be changed because their opponent isn't letting them do what they want to do. I don't know if that question makes any sense.
I think I heard most of what you said. You were, because I think you got cut off a little bit, but you were saying that you have your client trying to like run and do different stops. Is that what you were saying?
No, what I was saying is that when I work with a running athlete,
okay, yeah,
it's not that difficult to teach them how to cut, how to decelerate, how to stop, how to sprint, how to start. But I'm working with a judo athlete, and judo is not a sport that I really understand from a technical point of view.
Mhm.
But she has recurring back problems, and we haven't been able to come to the root of her problem. We know when she doesn't do judo,
Mhm.
her back is good. But once she starts really intense judo training, if she goes to a training camp or a tournament, she'll hurt her back again. And we haven't been able to figure out exactly what the problem is. It's not in the spine, but I know it's connected to her movements that she makes. But it's a puzzle that I have that I can't solve at this point.
So Dr. Driessen is asking your guidance.
Well, from my limited knowledge of the sport of judo, it's a martial arts, and I would imagine she's tightening up her entire body and kind of in a tightened, smaller position in order to not let her opponents take her down or submit her. So I don't know how long she's been doing judo and how competitively, because that also plays into perhaps the reasons why, or the causes. So why
she's been doing judo for about 20 years, and she's basically at the highest level you can get in the sport. She got 5th at the last Olympics.
That's incredible.
So she's pretty high level.
Yeah. I mean, just high level, that intense type of sport in that position constantly for 20 years can certainly do a number on your body, especially your back, because you're not in an upright, opened position. You're probably tight and kind of bent a little bit.
Yeah.
That's just my initial thoughts that are going in my head.
Yeah.
So, Amy, let's get a little bit more specific and help the coach out. So what are some of the contributors to injury? So the simplest contributor, the earliest contributor to an injury is a load that exceeds the tolerance of the body. Now, the tolerance can be specific to a joint, or it can be tolerance specific to the systemic systems of the body, that is the recovery, the immune, anything like that. So in the first instance, the first generic form of cause of injury is excessive load, full stop. So when he mentions the word camp, it tells me straight away that possibly the training load in the camp is more than the training load in individual control training. Now, that would therefore you test the hypothesis through questions. And if that was the case, it's a contributing factor. Now, it's not the cause, but it's a contributing factor. So stepping back from that, and Carson, does that sound right? The camps they're going would probably be high volume or more intense or more harder on the body than normal training domestically?
Yeah. The domestic training sometimes can be very intense, but the international training camps are definitely more intense.
Yes. So then what it tells us is that the distance between her current level of joint health and her optimal level of joint health is too close. So she's what I call close to the edge, and any changes or variations in training load are getting her to do what I call touch parking, where she's experiencing that discomfort. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do with the athlete is make the tolerance level so high that any aberration in training or competition does not bring you close to the edge. So we know that there's something not right in the body that's triggered when training load increases.
Yeah. So
that's the first step. The second step is forget about reacting to the opponent. Forget about that the opponent can dictate to you. That's a next step. Let's go to the next simplest step. The next simplest step is to ask, what are the most likely negative adaptations that occur in the body in that sport that we would need to reverse?
I think exactly what Amy said, that tight, bent over position, kyphosis,
good.
Thoracic spine tight.
Okay, there's one that you're missing. So that is exactly right. It's a forward flex sport. So they're in a forward flex position, and in the spinally flex sport, no question about it. But there's one aspect that's missing, and it's just one of the scariest causes of injuries in sport because it's really hard to reverse. When this element is involved in a sport, it becomes one of the toughest rehabilitations. And I'm going to use another sport as an example, golf. What's the greatest challenge of keeping a golf athlete injury-free or rehabilitating golf athlete? What are we fighting against?
I've never worked with a golfer, but we've got a couple of golfers in our center, and I would suspect it's got to do with the hips and the spine, the rotational speeds.
Rotation is the key word. Well, guess what? In judo,
it's exactly the same.
Sport, there is a greater component of rotation that you would appreciate. The longer an athlete plays judo, the more you'll see the rotation in the spine.
Yeah.
Now, ironically, the popularization of unilateral multiplanar activities in general pop has created this in general pop. And this is where it's really tough to heal a rotational injury because to reverse the patterns are much harder than in a standard single plane movement. So if you need to go back to the body and look at the body, and you might be surprised by the level of rotation. Now, when you get the rotation like that, you obviously get, and I don't even know which part of the spine that's just experiencing pain in, but I can tell you now that the rotational impact goes from the top to the bottom. And because of the crossover nature, the contralateral nature of rotation, then you end up with some seriously tight hip flexion on one side. But, as I said, I don't even need to know at this stage what level of discomfort in the spine that it's at. The rotational aspect is missed. And if it's ironic because it caught me out for so long, this very one. I had to reflect on it for a long time. You'd be surprised that in sport, for example, if we were dealing with most athletes, we'd say the shoulder downside is the side that's the tightest because the lats are down, etc. There is an irony in a rotational grappling sport where oftentimes the higher side is causing the problem. So it's not just a rotation; it's a lift. It's often a lift and rotation. So just go back to that, and from that perspective alone. So the bottom line is there is an adaptation in the musculoskeletal system, or it's muscular system. It's a soft tissue adaptation that is impacting at the joint level and therefore at the nervous level and the protective mechanisms that is just not in a healthy enough state. So that when the load is raised, it becomes apparent. It's there, and it would come out in a high level competition in an inadvertent position. Yeah. But when it's being replicated in a training camp, it just shows you that the load being one of the variables, in addition to say impact, but just pure training load is exacerbated, and you're not healthy enough. The athlete is not healthy enough from a musculoskeletal perspective. Simple as that. The challenge is finding out which of the soft tissue, generally speaking, is causing the problem. So how's that, Carson?
Okay. Thanks. Think you've helped me out.
Yeah, it's a tough one, that one, because it comes through in mixed martial arts, in judo and in BJJ. It comes through in science, but judo is a phenomenally repetitive sport, even though it's an open environment sport. It's not predictable per se. It still has some movements that are pretty repetitive. And I remember, I went through university with a judo player, and the judo club was very strong at the university, and I just watched his body change year after year after year. And when I saw him 5-10 years later, I just couldn't believe how much his body had adapted to the sport of judo. And the message is really strong. The more we play the sport, at the high level we play the sport, the more the adaptation will occur. That's why, as a physical preparation coach, if we can recognize that and reverse it, so the first swing of a tennis racket is the first time you needed to reverse the swing of that tennis racket. When you try and reverse a tennis racket swing 10 to 20 years later, you may as well forget about it. And I'm telling you, I'll give you some Australians. I'll give you some tennis. Tennis is a classic, although tennis is more in the horizontal plane, so it's not as complicated as judo. But you have a look at your fellow countryman, if you're Canadian, Raonic. If you have a look at Raonic's body,
no.
If Raonic came to me and said, "Ian, fix me," I'd probably say, "Can't. Too bad. Too sad. Unfortunate. You're too far gone." Unless he's going to stop playing tennis for 10 years. when an athlete gets that advanced in their adaptations, it becomes so hard to fix because they're not likely they're going to take a time off to that extent to reverse it. You're never going to fully reverse it when it's that advanced. So what you've got is you've got a 20-year judo veteran. You know how many times they've lifted and thrown. You've got a big job in your hands. This is what I'm talking about, the psychology of the athlete. Everyone needs to appreciate this. This is not a walk in the park. The more advanced the condition is, and it's just a straight lay down misère. You played the sport for a long time. You played at the highest level. You haven't been reversing this. We've got a big job in our hands. But at least you can know what you're dealing with. But the frustration, now we're talking about, Amy, now we're talking about further than the psychology of the injury athlete, we're talking about frustration, because the more chronic the injury is, the more frustrating it is to overcome. Yeah. I've been dealing with this for athletes for 40 years. It's a tough gig. But if that's where we need to be the guide, we need to be the one that is so experienced. And we say, listen, this is where you're at. This is why it happened. This is what it's going to take to fix it. And, if we can't predict, we can't prevent. It's a phenomenal concept. Everyone's running around telling me that they're preventing injuries. I'll say, okay, what are you preventing? And they're giving me textbook answers. No, I want to know with that athlete, what are the specific conditions that you are preventing? Be specific to the individual. Not even just to the sport, but the individual within the sport. So if you can't predict what's going to happen, then you can't truly prevent. You've got to say, listen, if you don't follow this guidance, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. If you do follow this guidance, A, B, and C could happen. Mm-hmm. So, it's a tough gig when you're picking up an athlete that's advanced in their adaptations, put it that way. Yeah. Great question, Carson. We appreciate you bringing that to the table. There's nothing better than helping an athlete fulfill their potential. And when you get so close, you're like, nobody remembers fifth place, and it's a great honor to them, and it'll be in their scrapbook forever. But there's a little bit more value in 1, 2, and 3. So I don't care what color it is, but just give me a color. And therefore, if you can help the athlete just go to that, that next level, it does change things a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Amy, we start off on ankles. We went to backs. So, did you have another injury category that you experienced yourself personally, Amy?
Yes. So I have knee issues as well.
Oh boy.
I was diagnosed with avascular necrosis, which is essentially bone death due to lack of blood flow to the necessary areas of the bone. So as a result, I had to get my knees scoped twice. And in one of my knees, my right knee, I got a bone graft or an autograft. So that was a more serious rehabilitation process. And that was what I had alluded to before about the physical therapist to help me get through that.
Well, before we get into that, let me just help you out here. And I'm going to provide some unsolicited guidance, personally and professionally. When you said you needed to have that, you could use the word I chose to have that.
I chose to have that, yes.
Because all rehabilitation is a choice in the same way that injury is a choice. Now, if we don't claim it as a choice, if we claim it as outside our circumstances, then we can't shape it. So that, there's a great saying around, help me understand what I can control, what I can't control. The courage to change what I can, and or the wisdom to where I'm going with that. So with the minute you have an athlete saying I had to do this, so if an athlete comes to me and said, I can't train today because my physical therapist said I can't train today. Like, I want to die 15 times inside. Like, really? You can't make a decision for yourself? That's just BS. So I encourage athletes to make decisions. And there are choices. Let's go back to that point in time in your rehab. Do you think there could have been other alternatives to surgery? And I'm not suggesting them, but do you think there were choices? Not that you're aware of, but in hindsight, do you think you had choices?
Yeah, of course.
Well, another question is, can you conservatively achieve a similar outcome without surgery in some cases?
Yeah.
It might be a different time frame. It might require more expertise, a different knowledge set. Mm-hmm. So, it's really important that the athlete starts taking responsibility. One of the first things I teach an athlete is to take responsibility, because if you don't, you're out in the field and even if you're in team sport, you're blaming your teammates for the loss. So it's if you want to win, it is up to you individually and collectively, and therefore it's not good enough to say I needed to. But anyway, I interrupted you. So then you had a great experience with your your knee physical therapist.
Yes, I did. And of course, I was very raw emotion, upset, frustrated, angry at everything, and just wanted to just get back out there. And honestly, not even play competitively at that point. It was just being able to run again. And that just was such a humbling experience for me as an athlete and as just an individual to go through that experience and have that taken away from me, which just simple walking even for several months.
Yeah, the word humbling is a really important word for me, because there are some athletes whose level of arrogance is such that I actually, and I'm not wishing it upon them, but I actually enjoy them more when they are injured, because it really humbles athletes. And more than that, you know, there's a lot we take for granted. I know that there's, you know, when an athlete, for example, if you can imagine an athlete losing their leg through a non-sporting related incident, and understand the humbleness of that, how much that athlete would appreciate having had their leg in the past, but at the same time having the courage and the grace to accept that situation. So, you know, these things occur. You know, great athletes lose limbs, et cetera, et cetera. So they're all great impacts on people's lives and an opportunity to learn from them, and I'm sure you did. I missed a question from Dave before, so Dave could speak to you in Flemish, but as you said before, you probably couldn't answer him. But David, go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Ian. At least I can pronounce her name well. Driessen.
Yes.
Oh, my apologies, David. There you go. This getting a lesson from our Belgian friend.
So Amy, first of all, thank you for being here. And I have to say, I'm really impressed by the fact that you really value the holistic approach from the program. So I don't know about you, but when I'm still doing the program, of course, and all in every occasion, I discover new things. So you're now halfway through the level 1 course, from my understanding. So I'm definitely sure that there's a lot of things that you say, wow, I didn't know that, and I really appreciate that, and that's very valuable. But are there any things that you say, wow, I didn't even know that that this information existed, and I want to learn more about it. I want to dig deeper. Any topics that you say that this is something that I really have to know more about?
Yeah, there's tons of material that I've already uncovered just halfway through in level 1, but things that really stuck out to me that I want to dive deeper in is the periodization, the programming, and the importance of the order in which you program certain exercises, certain training components, because you know I learned this in school in like basic form in my exercise prescription class and my exercise physiology, but reading through the KSI material about all of this is just so in depth. And like I thought, you know, this is pretty simple, just putting exercises together that kind of help towards a weakness or deficit or an inhibition that an athlete has, but not necessarily understanding why or how to perhaps sequence these exercises, the certain physical qualities that are at the highest priority first. So that's definitely something I really want to learn more about. And I actually just ordered the how to write strength programs. So I'm excited to get that and really understand and learn through the process.
The good thing is, sorry, Amy, like I said, there's always so much to learn, and I'm pretty sure that even the late Mike Pimentel, who came to I don't know how many camps, but 20, 30, 40, I don't know, you always learn something. So I don't think there's any coach who stops learning, and that's also because I guess Ian also keeps learning as a result of his work with the clients, with the athletes. So
absolutely.
yeah, that's great stuff, Amy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question.
Excellent. Appreciate it, David. And thank you for the correction. I never get lost. I'm always being told. So well done, David. And if I ever need anything culturally or in linguistically, I have so many resources around the world, literally. That is good. So, Amy, we've asked you a lot of questions.
Yeah.
In the wrap up, do you have any questions yourself that you wanted to go over, or yourself or any of the coaches on the call?
No real questions at the moment on my end. I have lots of questions that are related to material that I've yet to learn and read on my own. But I just really appreciate having this sort of platform to interact with the coaches. And like, I actually hadn't never spoken to you on a live format either. So it's really nice to actually do that and interact with everyone.
Well, I'm proud of you for doing that. It's some people might find it a little bit intense because that's that might obviously my niche is with the athletes who play at high stakes, and therefore we can't afford to muck around. We get straight to the point. But if you can work with that, then there's a lot to learn. We're in an interesting time where three main disciplines are shaping and they have the thinking. You've got the sports industry in the middle. You've got the rehab therapy industry on one side. And you've got the fitness industry on the other side. And there's a interesting melting pot between the three. Even though people working in the fitness industry, I discourage them for being too influenced by the fitness industry, because fitness industry is looking for convenience and the whole value set. Like, the desire to take my 35 steps and how to write program, make them into, what was the next invitation was 16, and then the next invitation was 9, and then the last invitation was down to 3. Like, life's not that. It's not about taking the 30-minute workout into the 3-minute workout into the 30-second workout into the 3-second workout. I mean, that's a great sales pitch, but it's not real.
Right.
And then on the other side, you've got physical therapy, which, if you take it from a purely clinical perspective, I think you miss the point. So one of the greatest challenges I have with physical therapy is that it's too confined to the clinic, because the injuries don't occur in the clinic. Mm-hmm. And decisions aren't made in the clinic. So you really want to get out and get into sport as you have. You've got personal experiences, so you understand the injuries personally, and that's profound. There's a lot of lessons that we all take from our injuries, and we want to be careful not to manifest them or replicate them in others, but to have had them creates an empathy, and without an empathy, you don't have the same connection. So when you come from a point of empathy with someone, it's far more powerful in your communication. So I really think you're on track. Just keep thinking for yourself, and never forget how much it helped you to get good guidance. And that's what you're providing. We're just providing guidance to people who are looking for guidance.
Yeah, and I just love everything that I've learned so far, and just having this network to be able to speak with and interact with, and not just have it be an echo chamber, but having different opinions and views. So I think that's very valuable for anybody.
Yeah, we would encourage people to think for themselves, and whatever conclusion you come up with, we'll be happy to test it with you and see what we all can learn from it. The International Aid for Sport is just a phenomenal thing. I mean, I remember one time I was in Buenos Aires, and I was in the Olympic training facility in Buenos Aires, but in the early 90s, that wasn't much. It was like an old building, literally the holes in the floor. And then I turned around, there's an athlete that I'd worked with a decade beforehand. And he was an Australian athlete that happened to marry an Argentinian national champion javelin, or something like that. And so he's there with all the track and field athletes. So sport does give you an opportunity to learn about cultures and to travel the world. And I took our education globally for the help of the internet in the late 90s, and so we have coaches distributed right around the world, and it helps us spread the message. It's a really important message. So I used to travel a lot with athletes and get to a lot of countries, but one person can't help as many people as many. So fortunately, we are growing in numbers of people who are open to listen to what's going on and make your own decision. That's all I want. I don't want to hear someone else's ideas. I want to hear your ideas based upon your objective experimentation. So it can be personal, doesn't matter. It can be professional, as long as it's objective and you're willing to replace it if you find a better way. But it's not a better way because the trends, not a better way because some new book came out telling you, this is what you got to do. It's, if it worked in 1970 and you haven't found a better way since 1970, it still works now. The human body hasn't evolved to that extent. It really hasn't. So I just encourage you to continue on the path. It'll make you unique. It sometimes makes a conformity challenge, but at the end of the day, athletes don't care about who your friends are. They don't care even sometimes what your qualifications are. They don't care whether what you're doing was confirmed in the latest point of science. They just want to know that what you've got them to do is going to help them fulfill their potential and achieve their goals and keep them safe.
Yeah.
And those three things are not dependent on trends or research for that matter. There's so much more to it, but it's about the human at the end of the day. So I really appreciate your contribution, Amy, to sharing the message, because I don't know, it's not winning the battle globally. The injuries are winning the battle, but that's not what we're here to save the world. We're here to help people who are looking for a solution. Yep.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's been an honor. So happy to meet you.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to your professional development, and we may need to call upon you down the track to give a lecture to our coaches, or have an athlete in your area that needs some help from a physical therapist. So stay in the network, because that's how it works. We work globally, collaboratively. It's a pretty rare environment, as you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to it all. So thank you so much again.
Good stuff. And thank you, coaches, for supporting the call and dialoguing with Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Amy. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.